In this presentation, we will explore many of the reasons why we do pest control on right-of-ways. In addition to this, we will discuss some specific integrated pest management approaches that we can utilize, particularly on our highway right-of-ways. Finally, we will learn about the fate of pesticides, specifically herbicides, after they leave our application device. This is important because we can prevent adverse effects from occurring by having knowledge about the pesticides we are using and when the optimum time to put them down would be. Weeds are the major pest of concern in our right-of-ways, and there are many reasons why we want to control them. To put it simply, a weed is a plant growing where we don't want it to grow. Agencies that have to manage weeds along a right-of-way usually rely heavily on chemicals, but need to consider all integrated approaches when looking for long-term solutions and cost savings. Depending on the site and the chemical we plan to use, we will need specific application equipment to do the job. Identifying sensitive areas prior to the time we apply chemicals will help us avoid environmental or human health effects. In addition, we may discover that because of the location of a sensitive area to our application site, we may not be able to use a chemical at all. Once we apply a pesticide, it is really too late to try to correct an error. Therefore, knowing what happens to the pesticide once it is released into the environment will prevent adverse effects from occurring. The major reason we need to control weeds, especially along a highway right-of-way, is to maintain a clear, or safety zone to maintain sign visibility and maintain sight distance. A vehicle operator, traveling at a high rate of speed, has only a short period of time to prevent a crash. Agencies that have the responsibility of maintaining right-of-ways need to know that most states have weed laws which require that steps be taken to control noxious weeds. If noxious weeds are not controlled, highway right-of-ways are a major way noxious weeds are spread. If we control weeds along right-of-ways, we will improve drainage and avoid flooding of the roadway. Also, water running off the roadway will eventually erode dirt roads and the soil adjacent to and underneath paved roads if it is not channeled away quickly. In colder climates, steps need to be taken to make sure snow does not drift across the road. So it may be necessary to manage vegetation to prevent blowing snow. Snow removal is difficult or nearly impossible where vegetation, living or dead, exists on the right-of-way, and if there is not a barrier located off the right-of-way to prevent drifting snow, this would be a problem. Vegetation located outside the right-of-way may prevent some snow drifting in addition to the use of a fence. Dry vegetation like cheatgrass is an excellent fire fuel. We have to focus our chemical control measures on controlling weeds before the vegetation dries out. If we don't, then we will have to mechanically remove vegetation, which is more expensive. Soils can erode not just from the action of water but over time. Plant roots will create air spaces that result in roadway collapse. Burrowing rodents can cause problems as well. Finally, we can increase the useful life of our roadside hardware like signs and barriers, and it is important that we take into account aesthetic values of have a clean right-of-way that has a pleasing appearance. As mentioned earlier, a weed is a plant growing we don't want them to grow. One of the things we wrestle with when trying to educate the public about controlling noxious weeds is that many are attractive plants. In addition to this, they are also attractive to pollinators as a source of nectar. Yellow star thistle, the picture on the top, right, has an attractive yellow flower but produces thick stands and a spiny flowering body. The term noxious is a legal designation, but weeds can also be described as invasive, which generally means that they arrived from a different country and can, in a short period of time, take over an entire area. Weeds are classified as such because they are superior competitors. They outcompete the native plant population for water and nutrients and the way they utilize light more efficiently. In addition to this, they have few natural enemies. Invasive weeds that are brought in from other countries usually arrive without their natural control agents. This invasive weed is known as tall whitetop. It arrived in the west from the Mediterranean region, and this is a picture from east of Reno. As you can see, the area has quickly become a monoculture of only tall whitetop with limited value for wildlife or recreation. This site is not even preferred by livestock, and endangered species which might need a riparian or river habitat could not exist here. Another thing about tall whitetop is that the plant does not have a root system which can hold soil in place or stabilize a riverbank. As you can see, The soils in these sites are easily eroded. This generally means shallower and warmer water, limiting the riparian value of this habitat. Weeds outcompete native plants and displace them. The only value to wildlife when you have with a monoculture like white top is cover. There is little or no value as a food source or nesting habitat. Life on the earth can be classified as plant or animal. Flowering plants can be classified further as angiosperms or gymnosperms. The most common weed species are angiosperms. Gymnosperms are conifers or plants with needle-like leaves which include pine trees. Gymnosperms are not usually considered weeds unless they are growing someplace where we don't want them. If so, they can easily be removed. At this time I would like to show you a short video which will seem maybe a little too simple, but it covers a lot about plant anatomy and how the different parts of a plant function and how the plant grows. It is about 8 minutes long, but it is important for you to know so that you can understand why our pesticides, herbicides, when we are referring to chemicals which control weeds, work to control plants. Now that we have a basic understanding about plant anatomy and function, we can talk about plant life cycles. Plants are propagated through the production of seed. When seeds germinate, they produce seedlings, and the vegetative growth that results includes stems and leaves. Flowers are then produced, which are then pollinated. The flower produces seeds, and the cycle starts again. Seeds are not the only way plants reproduce, and we will talk about this later. Life cycles of flowering plant are of 3 types. Plants with annual life cycles, which can be further divided into summer or winter annual, complete their life cycles within 1 year. In most cases, removal of the plant or the application of a herbicide results in control because the roots don't persist after the life cycle is complete. The important thing is that plant removal or the application of a herbicide must be done before the plant produces seeds. Examples of annual plants include sheetgrass and Russian thistle. Biennial plant complete their life cycles in 2 years. Seed germination and vegetative growth takes place in year 1. Flowering, seed production and death of the plant takes place in year 2. Examples of plants with a biennial life cycle include thistles and wild carrots. Perennial plants complete all life cycle stages in the first year. They live for many years. Similar to biennial and annual plants, control can be achieved in the seedling stage. However, there is another opportunity in the fall. Some examples include perennial pepperweed, Russian knapweed, purple loosestrife, and most aquatic weeds. Weeds with perennial life cycle are the most difficult to control. Perennial weeds come back every year. There are 3 types of perennial weeds: simple, creeping, and bulbous. Simple perennials reproduce through seed production, but can also reproduce through root segments if the root is cut up. An example is tall whitetop. Creeping perennials are spread by seeds or vegetatively through stolons or rhizomes, which are stems that grow above or below the soil surface. Raspberry or blackberry plants are examples. Bulbous perennials reproduce vegetatively by underground bulbs or tubers, in addition to seeds. Onion and garlic plants reproduce in this manner. Vascular plants can be classified further as monocot or dicot. It is important that we know how these 2 types of plants differ because not all the pesticides we select work the same way against these types of plants. We also know that the first step in an integrated approach to pest management is to identify the pest first. We can easily identify monocots by examining the leaves. Usually they are long and slender and they have parallel, or linear venation. The root system of monocots are usually shallow. On the other hand, dicots have large leaves with net-type venation. The root system of dicots are deep and have a main rooting structure known as a taproot. Feeder or fibers grow out from this taproot. Common plants which exhibit the characteristics of monocots are grasses. Grasses have a fibrous root system and long, slender leaves with parallel venation. Another monocot which looks similar to a grass is a sedge. The major difference is that sedges have triangular instead of round stems. Sedges are perennial plants and grasses can be perennial or annual. Dicots are known to have large, broad leaves with net-like venation. Dicots have diverse growth points unlike monocots which have one growth point usually located at the soil surface. Dicots have underground reproductive systems which include deep roots. Dicots can be annual, biennial or perennial. Dicots include vines, Ornamental plants, ferns and trees. A fern is a monocot and reproduces via rhizomes, but also produces spores, which are reproductive structures more common to fungi. Parasitic seed plants like dodder emerge from seed but do not develop roots. Dodder plants develop tendrils which attach to other plants to extract food. For this reason, they are sometimes considered a disease organism. It is not surprising that in right-of-way pest management, woody and herbaceous plant species, both monocots and dicots, are the major pests we have to control. Classification of aquatic plants vary. They are vascular plants, monocot or dicot, free-floating, submersed or rooted. Algae is considered a plant, although it does not have true leaves or a vascular system. Again, as is the case with all plants, it is important to identify aquatic plants correctly to determine the methods of control which works the best. As an example, submergent plants like Alodia have a thin outer layer on their leaves. By identifying this plant as a submergent aquatic plant, in almost every case we would select an aquatic herbicide as part of our integrated approach to pest management. Integrated pest management, otherwise known as IPM, is the use of all available tools to manage pests, minimizing the impact to the environment and prioritizing preventative measures. By using this approach, we encourage a long-term approach to our pest management problem. Integrated weed management includes a combination of control measures. In addition to the use of herbicide, one must also consider the use of mechanical, biological and cultural means as possible weed control measures. We tend to rely on the use of herbicides for many of our weed problems because this approach is usually the most economical. For example, mechanical measures such as mowing and dredging, aquatic weed control, are expensive because we must use equipment and could be labor-intensive. Biological and cultural approaches take some time to implement and we usually have to use them in combination with other approaches. Since the use of pesticide is a short-term approach, it may become more expensive over time since it is really a short-term approach and we have to retreat over and over again. Also known as being on the pesticide treadmill, long-term pest control can be achieved through the use of a combination of methods. As with any IPM approach, we must first identify our pest species before we contemplate our control method. Once we do that, we assemble a battery of control measures we can use. Monitoring of a pest population is necessary so that we know what the pest population is before and after treatment, so that we can determine if our pest control strategy is effective. There may be site-specific requirements which will limit the options we have available to us. Once we determine the optimum time to employ our pest control strategy, we implement our measure and then evaluate how well the control strategy worked. Timing is everything when implementing our control strategy. There are many resources that we can use to help us identify weeds. Even though there are many resources available on the internet, some books can be taken into the field which have color photographs of common weeds like weeds of the West. Many times we don't have reliable internet access when we are in the field. Do these manuals and handbooks work well? Identification charts help us to key out plant specimens, but there are also specialists at the Department of Agriculture and Cooperative Extension that can assist you. Many times these experts can identify a weed specimen just by looking at a sample because they are familiar with common weeds in their areas. Mechanical measures include digging, mowing and burning, although burning presents special problems and may be not advised or illegal during certain times of the year. By making sure that when we plant desirable plants they are free of weed seeds, we won't be spreading weed infestations and making extra work for ourselves. It is also possible that we move weed seeds around when we move our landscaping equipment. Other types of cultural control we can employ include picking the proper time of planting, mulching, covering the seed bed, will help shade the weeds and will improve desirable plant and soil health. Removing weed plants after they die help to keep our planting beds free of weed seeds, and cleaning of our cultivation landscape equipment helps to prevent the spread of weeds. Planting desirable plants before our weed species emerge is a cultural control measure. Fertilization and soil nutrients and amendments will aid in this process. In some instances, we can consider the use of pest-resistant or genetically modified plants. This particular image demonstrates how genetic modification can help plants resist chemical application so that they are not affected by the herbicide but the chemical will still control the problem weed. Without this genetic modification, many our herbicides are not selective and will kill our weeds and our desirable plants. Plants thrive in the right combination of sand, silt, clay and organic material, better known as the soil texture and structure. Soil texture and structure affect nutrient composition and water-holding capacity of the soil. Soils made up of silt and that have a large organic matter component are high in nutrient composition and can retain water to be absorbed by plants. On the other hand, soils high in sand have little water-holding ability and clays prevent water and root penetration. Water will drain from soils located on steep slopes no matter what the soil texture and structure is. Soil pH is a measure of how acid or alkali the soil is. Soil pH is measured on a scale of 1 to 14, with 7 being neutral. Soils which fall in the neutral range are generally the most fertile. Not always because it holds the most nutrients, but the nutrients are more available. Most soils fall either in the acid or alkaline range and soil amendments can be added to adjust pH such as lime to make a soil more alkaline or sulfuric acid to improve the acidity of the soil. In most cases, the last option which is considered, especially when looking at the control options that we have available to us for weed control, is the use of biological control agents. Biological controls focus on enhancing the effects of natural enemies. For weed control, we have few choices, although the use of grazing animals like goats can be considered biological control. However, for the control of pest insects, we have more options. Predatory insects such as ladybugs and praying mantis are a couple of biological control agents we have to control aphids. Predatory nematodes and predatory mites help to control pest nematodes and mites. Beneficial plant pathogens can be used to colonize roots, and we can use natural control agents such as raptors or coyotes to control rodents and pests such as pigeons and starlings. Introduction of exotic insect pest must be permitted and approved by the U.S. and state agriculture agencies. Weed management options include the use of beetles to limit the growth and spread of salt cedar. Grass carp can be used to control some aquatic weeds. In every case, before you consider the introduction of biological control agents like grass carp, you must work with the local wildlife management agency. Of course, for almost any integrated weed control program, you will most likely have to consider the use of chemicals. With weed control, we will in many cases rely on the use of chemicals. You may notice that this mixer loader is wearing the proper personal protection equipment and is tank mixing the pesticide Roundup, or glyphosate. You may have also noticed that there have been a lot of commercials lately asking those persons who have developed a type of cancer known as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and believe it was a result of exposure to glyphosate, to call various law firms because they may be entitled to compensation, in other words, a jury trial and lawsuit against the pesticide manufacturer. A little bit of history on this lawsuit. In 2015, based on a recent study, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. After the release of this finding, EPA conducted a review of all the data it had available on the safety of glyphosate and concluded that the majority of research supports its finding that glyphosate is not likely to carcinogenic to humans. Because EPA relies heavily on industry-sponsored research when it conducts safety reviews, a jury found that exposure to glyphosate was a contributing factor to a terminal cancer of a California groundskeeper. Similar verdicts were reached in 2 additional cases since then. The jury awards in these cases are being reviewed and will likely be reduced substantially. After EPA released its draft findings, it conducted another review of all the comments and research available. EPA still has concluded that there are no risks to public health from the current registered uses of glyphosate. This also assumes that persons follow label directions and take the required precautions when using the pesticide. The bottom line is glyphosate is still widely available and registered for use in the United States. One other important thing to keep in mind is that FIFA is a cost-benefit statute and that if the benefits of using a particular pesticide outweighs the risks of using the product, it can be registered legally. Based on the worldwide use of this product and its importance in crop production and landscape protection, glyphosate will be available for the foreseeable future. When choosing a pesticide product for weed control, we must first review a pesticide label to determine if the correct site is listed. The label is a legal document, and in most cases, we can use the pesticide against any target weed as long as the site is on the label. We must still do our homework to make sure the pesticide we choose will kill the intended plant. Herbicides kill weeds in two different ways: either they kill by contact or they are absorbed by the plant and kill the plant systemically. Contact herbicides kill plants by destroying plant tissue and works quickly. Contact herbicides are most effective against annual weeds. If we use contact herbicides against perennial or biennial weeds, we may only kill the tops of the plant. Systemic herbicides, on the other hand, work slower but are more effective against perennial weeds because the pesticide can be translocated throughout the plant and will kill roots, stems and leaves. Herbicide act against weeds in other ways. Defoliants and desiccants dry out leaves and are also used to harvest crops. By drying the leaves, seeds and flower buds can be harvested easier. Plant growth regulators affect plant development. We might want to use a plant growth regulator to prevent turf growth or to prevent the development of fruit on fruit trees in urban settings. Pre-emergent herbicides are applied to the soil. When the plant germinates or emerges from the seed, weed control will be achieved once plant comes in contact with the herbicide-treated soil. So, in order for the herbicide to work, it must come in contact with the target weed. It must then be absorbed into the plant, and then it must accumulate in levels high enough in the plant tissue to cause death. If any one of these three things fail to happen, then the herbicide won't work. Pesticide additives can be tank mixed with our herbicides to increase effectiveness. Non-ionic surfactants improve herbicide retention by spreading the spray droplet across the leaf surface. Fertilizers help to balance the pH in the water mixture and aid the movement of pesticide into the plant cell. Oils loosen and dissolve waxy cuticle surfaces and usually are made up of vegetable, petroleum or seed oils. Pesticides are designed to control the intended target pest and then break down over a short period of time. This is true for most of our contact and systemic herbicides like glyphosate. However, in the case of a pre-emergent herbicide, we want pesticide residual to remain in the soil over a long period of time. Examples of chemicals with long residual action include aminopyrrolate and picloram. We must be aware that the longer a chemical remains in a specific location, the more chance there is to move off-site. So it is important that we use the lowest rates possible to achieve the desired weed control. The pesticide label will help us make this determination. Systemic herbicides are translocated either through the phloem, fluid which flows through the plant from the top down, or through the xylem, which is translocated from the roots up. Systemic herbicides take longer to work than contact herbicides. Contact herbicides will kill any green plant tissue that it comes in contact with. This diagram demonstrates how pesticides can be translocated. Pesticides applied to plant tissues like glyphosate and paraquat are translocated down through the phloem to the roots. Soil-applied herbicides like spike are applied to the soil and is absorbed by the roots. From there it is translocated through the xylem and will kill the above-ground parts of the plant. It is important that the plant is not killed too quickly or the herbicide will not be translocated.